Speaking of which, we have an article here that says that Bitcoin could hit 10% adoption rate by the end of the decade. And so if this trajectory continues to move on, that could be very well it. Lettuce hands is an expression used sometimes people use to describe an investor who sells their Bitcoin first at the first sign of trouble, often at a loss. An example of this used in a sentence might be Elon Musk has lettuce hands because he sold 75% of Tesla's Bitcoin holdings in the second quarter. Champ, I believe this is one that you had brought up. Kind of elaborate on this a little bit.
Well, I want to know the number. I mean, I think this is just the inevitable, right? Bitcoin is a technology that has been invented. You cannot uninvent it. Because it is technology, it moves forward. It is based in logic and math. Thus, it is legitimate. Okay. Its adoption is inevitable. And these rough economic times we just spent 30 minutes talking about just enhances its use case. Every time Gensler or Powell or anybody else takes the stage, all it is an endorsement for Bitcoin, right? And this article just says as much. Given enough time, extrapolate far enough out. And this is why people say Bitcoin's going to go to 500,000. Bitcoin's going to go to 1 million. It's not financial advice, but if you project on the trajectory that we are already moving on, that is where it's going, right? So like Greg just said, you can't take such a huge mess that we have right now economically and quickly turn that around. That is going to take time. So again, you project out what is going to happen. If we stay on the same roads and we stay on the same routes with the same policies we've been having, this article is inevitable. Same way. And 10% of global adoption, I think, is the low side right there. What has to happen? You know, Bitcoin goes to $3,000 and you're like, dang, I should have bought it when it was 30. So Bitcoin goes up to $20,000. It drops back. Dang, I should have bought it when it was $10,000. Bitcoin's going to go up to $60,000. It drops back to 20. It's going to go back up and it's going to eventually get to these numbers. You'll just be sitting there saying, I wish, when really what you should do is just research, look at the inevitable, look at basically 200% per year is Bitcoin's average return and just bite the bullet. Just buy the stuff, keep it safe, and then forget about it.
On top of that, Tim, is the fact that Bitcoin mining is the buyer of last resort for electric companies. So many people are speaking of renewable energy, wind, solar, and these are sources that are not consistent in terms of production. And when it is producing, usually it's at a time that's off of where the needs usually are. So if it's not used, it just goes to waste. Bitcoin, because it's such a stable consumer of the power, it guarantees that every watt or megawatt or terawatt produced is consumed by minting a tangible asset. So it creates funding to improve our electrical power grid, any country's electrical power grid. And if you notice here on this chart, we're looking at is sustainable power mix, Bitcoin mining versus countries overall. And Bitcoin is the one that has the highest consumption or demand for it that produces a return on investment. Everyone else are the citizenry and industries using the power and consuming it to produce. Bitcoin is doing the same thing, but at a very stable consumption. And if it's too much, we all know even here at Medify, where we can actually adjust the power consumption based on the market needs at the time. So there's not only adoption as investments, but also adoption in terms of power to stabilize the grids themselves and produce usable asset. And the fact that it's portable, there's so many things in favor of Bitcoin for this adoption. And there's this chart here in this where it shows long-term projection of global Bitcoin adoption, where we see where we are.
That's crazy. That's crazy to see that we're that low. I just wouldn't have expected it to be that low, given how much we see it now mainstream and what have you. Like, I'm surprised that it's that small of an amount.
I think some of it's probably education, right? You got people that haven't bought into it yet because they feel like one coin is too much. They don't realize you can buy portions of coins.
Absolutely.
So that people think it's a rich man's game right now, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even
too late.
Yeah. And you're not too late at all.
Right.
Oh.
Based on what's coming. So we are in a time period of reckoning in terms of the industry itself, but in terms of the technology, looking at it from a technology like the internet, and this is the next iteration of the internet, a protocol for money, we haven't even touched it yet. When you go to countries like in Latin America, where they're not even aware, it depends on the strata of society of we're speaking to, they're not even aware of Bitcoin itself. They're barely aware of money transfer internal to them for tips or anything like we have Venmo and these others.
Right.
they don't see it. The ones that are aware of it are the ones that are having to send from other countries to their country. That's where they're more aware of Bitcoin itself. But once people get it, not just as long-term investment, but also as a means to peer-to-peer, meaning I, Brad, and Tam or Greg can send money to each other directly without a middleman taking their fee, it will change the game when it comes to this. I don't know about replacing fiat, but yes, like gold being a counterparty or a hedge against fiat overall.
And you know what's crazy about articles like these? What I think they really do is they show the power of a deflationary currency, which Bitcoin is. It is capped at 21 million. You can never print more of it. And that's exactly what we're doing with our dollars and other fiat currencies as well. Is they're just infinite. We can just print them forever. And people, I think, are starting to see the difference. Look how, quote unquote, expensive Bitcoin is right now relative to, like this chart says, no adoption whatsoever. How can Bitcoin be $20,000 plus? How can Bitcoin get to $500,000 or $1 million? That is the power of a capped deflationary currency.